welcome back to my channel, or for those of you who are watching for the first time, welcome to my channel. In today's video, I want to outline the 10 biggest mistakes that I see students make during the medical school application process. They're in no particular order, but I essentially just sat down and brainstormed a list of the things that I've seen students mess up on, or even the things I messed up on myself. And so I hope this video will help you understand what to avoid doing during the medical school application process so that you guys have the best possible outcomes. So the number one biggest mistake that I see students make during the medical school application process is submitting stuff later than other applicants. Now, there is some late deadline for your primary application and your secondary application, and some students think that as long as they get it in by that late deadline, totally fine. It might be anywhere between, let's say, September and November. But this couldn't be further from the truth. You should be submitting your primary application as close to that opening date as possible, oftentimes in early June. And you should be submitting your secondary applications soon after you receive them. If you're waiting weeks and even months to submit some of these things that you could have submitted earlier, you're essentially just hurting your chances of getting into the medical schools that you want to go to. So be early and don't wait. The second mistake I see students make is reporting their activities with no thought to an overall story. I'll see activity lists that really make no sense when put together. There'll be lots of bizarre, disparate things in that list. And then when I read the other parts of the application, the student or applicant has made no attempt to make that list into a cohesive story about why they've done those things and what they got out of doing those things. And so it's absolutely fine if you're applying as an applicant and you have a bunch of different interests that really don't fit together well, as long as you make sure that somewhere in your application, you tie together at least some of those things into a cohesive story. Because without that, I think admissions officers won't really understand the full picture of who you are. And it might seem like your application is more of a jumbled mess than it is a really good story about why you as an applicant should be admitted into their medical school. The third mistake I see students often make is trying to be better than everyone else as opposed to trying to be different than everyone else. I have so many students who think that the only way to get into medical school is being a biology or chemistry major, is spending their summers doing bench research at some fancy lab, and is shadowing doctors in all of their spare time. But the fact of the matter is, you don't have to fit into some prescribed list of things that medical school applicants should do. And honestly, if you are doing those things, it's going to be really hard to beat out your fellow applicants because there's always going to be someone who shadowed more hours than you. There's always going to be someone who published their bench research in a better journal than you did. And there's always going to be someone who took more biology classes or more chemistry classes and perhaps did even better in those classes than you did. So out of all these people who are doing very similar things to what you're doing, I'm sure at least some of them will end up overshadowing you in the application pool. And so I think a much better approach is to take a unique path. Don't do the same exact things that everyone else is doing to get into medical school. Sure, you have to take the MCAT, you have to take all those pre-med required classes, but what you can do is find really unique extracurricular activities. If you love computer science, be a comp sci major. If you really love space, go do a NASA internship. Don't feel that you need to fit this very prescribed path in order to get into medical school, because what you're going to find is you need to work much harder on that typical or traditional path in order to shine from all the other applicants who are on that same exact path. But if you choose a more unique path, you're going to find that there's a lot less competition and it's going to be a lot easier to shine. I would say the fourth mistake that students make is trying to rush through this process. There are many students who decide they want to be physicians midway through their college career, and they have a lot of scrambling they need to do. They have to take that long list of pre-med classes, they have to study for the MCAT, they need to work on their application. There's just a lot to do if they decide they want to go to medical school. And all too often, these students think that they can do it all in a really condensed period of time. They think they can write their personal statement while studying for their MCAT while also trying to ace their college courses. And the fact of the matter is, if you're trying to do too much in too little time, you're not going to be able to do well at any of those things. And so I encourage students to be really realistic about how long each step of the application process realistically should take. And if they sit back and say, I just don't have time to give my 100% best to all of these steps, then I encourage those students to take a gap year so they're able to dedicate the time needed to do each step of the application process. Because even though it seems frustrating, I don't want to take a gap year, I want to get to medical school, I want to start being a physician as soon as possible. If you're haphazardly throwing together an application, you're probably not going to get into medical school, and then you're still going to have to take a gap year, but just under much worse conditions. And so be realistic about how much time it will actually take to get through the application process, MCAT included, and be kind to yourself and give yourself that time that you really need. I would say the fifth mistake students make is applying to medical school for the wrong reasons. I've worked with students who maybe feel familial pressure to apply to medical school. Maybe they're really driven by the status symbol of being a doctor or the high salaries that many specialties offer. But if those are the primary reasons driving you to apply to medical school, the insincerity of the whole process will become clear to the admissions committee. They're going to know after interviewing you or after reading your essays that you're not really there for the right reasons, and they're not going to accept you as a result. And so before you even start the medical school application process, I urge you to really think about why you're doing it and making sure that it has more to do with helping people or scientific discovery than it has to do with what your parents want you to do or about what paycheck you might expect at the end of this. The sixth mistake that I often see students making is overscheduling themselves during the application season. A lot of the students applying to medical school are either juniors or seniors in college, and a lot of them end up scheduling really time-intensive internships for that summer that they're applying. And although you can write a personal statement and get teachers' letters of rec and all of that while you're taking college courses, it's really hard to write high-quality secondaries if you have a really time-consuming internship at the same time. And so I encourage students that the summer they're doing their secondary applications, don't overbook yourself. Don't allot every second of your day to doing a job when you also need to allot time to writing your secondaries. And so I think, don't just sit at home and do nothing all summer, but just be realistic about how long it's actually going to take to write secondaries and make sure you're not so overscheduled that you don't have time to actually do that. I would say the seventh mistake that students make is treating the personal statement like an English 101 essay. Students will send me their personal statements and they will be in that perfect 5-paragraph format that they teach you in English class, where you have your 3 body paragraphs, your opening paragraph, your conclusion paragraph. You have transition phrases like however and therefore. And it really just reads like an English essay. And that is not the kind of essay that's going to grab the attention of the medical school admissions officers. You need to write something that's creative, that's not the same format that they're used to reading all the time, that sounds a lot more you than it does a dictionary, and that really just expresses who you are as a person. And if you are writing in a formal English 101 essay way, it's going to be really hard to do that. And so as hard as it might be, try to break free from what you've been taught in all of your English classes and really write something that reflects who you are and write something with a lot of creativity and uniqueness. The eighth mistake that I see students make is not preparing for interviews. There are lots of students I talk to who are like, I am so good at talking to people. I've done debate during high school, or I've had interviews before. No sweat, I don't need to prep for my med school interviews. And I think that that is a really foolish approach to the interview process. Medical school interviews are really, really daunting, not so much because the interview itself is difficult, but because you've spent years and years waiting for this moment to give it your best and last shot to get into medical school. And just the weight of that moment, the weight of the interview, is really hard for a lot of students to handle. And so if you're going into that interview and have not practiced at all, the anxiety and stress might get the best of you and you might just really fall flat on your face. And so no matter how many interviews you've had before, no matter how much public speaking experience you've had in your past, I think it's essential that you dedicate at least some time to prepping for medical school interviews. Do practice questions with friends or family, read over your secondaries and your application before your interview day, and learn about the school that you're interviewing at. Because the fact of the matter is, if you approach that interview really prepared, really confident, and on top of your game, that's going to be your best chance of actually getting into that medical school. The ninth mistake I see students making is not asking for teacher letter of recommendations early enough in the process. Imagine that you're a biology teacher at a big state university and you have 200 students who are asking for letters of rec. And if that's you, you have three choices. Choice one is to write 200 high quality essays, but just be completely burnt out and have no time for yourself. Option two is write 200 essays, but make them really low quality and not very helpful in actually helping the student get into their health program. Or choice three is to limit how many essays you're actually writing for students. And I would say a majority of professors choose that last option. A lot of professors at big schools will limit how many essays they're willing to write for students just because they realize they can't do it all. And so let's say your favorite biology professor will only write 20 letter of recommendations for your application season. Do you really want to wait until May of your application year to ask her? Of course not. You don't want to risk not getting letters from the people who you think would write you the best letters. And so the earlier you ask, the earlier your odds are that that professor will respond to you and agree to write you a letter of recommendation. And I would say the 10th mistake that students make during the application process is pushing their MCAT test date back and back and back. Let's say you're studying for the MCAT and you schedule your test date for October 10th. October 5th rolls around and you're starting to really doubt yourself, you're getting nervous and you say, okay, I will pay X amount of dollars and I'll push that test date back till October 30th. And October 20th rolls around, you're like, oh, well, now I've had less time to study because school got busy and now I feel like I'm even less prepared for this test. And what happens is students just keep pushing their test back later and later and later. And maybe in unique situations that helps, but in the majority of cases, I would say that students just perform worse the more times they push their MCAT back. The anxiety builds, they start forgetting the things they learned at the beginning of their dedicated studying period, and it just becomes this huge burden that they can't get off of their shoulders. And so unless something out of the blue happens or there's a really good reason why you need to push your test date back, I highly recommend picking a date and just sticking to it. And no matter how you feel the day before or the week before that test date, do your best to not succumb to the pressure of pushing that test date back, because I can almost guarantee you it won't be helpful in the long run. And so those are 10 mistakes that I've seen students make during the medical school application process. And I hope with this video, you guys will be able to identify if you're making some of these mistakes and correct those mistakes. You guys have the best chance of getting into medical school as possible. If you guys have any questions about the medical school application process, please feel free to send me an email, which is in the description box below, or comment on this video, and I'll get back to you as quickly as possible. And if you learned anything at all from this video, please be sure to hit that like button and subscribe to my channel to learn more tips and tricks for the medical school application process. Guys, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.